Grief isn't always loud. In children and teens, it can look like slipping grades or sudden bursts of anger or hyperactivity. Using national data from 2023, in the U.S., about 1 in 12 children will experience the death of a parent or sibling before they turn 18. In this situation, one of the big challenges that caregivers run into is finding the right kind of help that doesn't make the situation worse.
I think there's this appropriately self-focused attitude with children that is appropriate developmentally, but when it comes to grief, then it's their fault. And they'll find a way how that death was their fault, and they can really internalize that if it's not processed.
That's Natasha Daniels, a child therapist who specializes in treating grief, anxiety, and obsessive-compulsive disorder. A CDC study published last year found that nearly half of children in America with a diagnosed mental or behavioral disorder didn't get the care they needed. Most often, this is because of long wait lists to be seen, high medical costs, or not having access to the right kind of provider nearby. As a therapist, Daniels is familiar with these barriers to care and also draws from her own personal experience navigating grief and seeking help for her children.
My husband was a healthy 42-year-old. He got injured at work and had to have Achilles tendon surgery, very minor outpatient, and he was just recovering at home a few days later and went to bed and never woke up and died of a blood clot, we found out later. So at the time, this was about 3 years ago at this point, and my kids were 9, 11, and 18. So to have that sudden death is hard no matter what. But I think the suddenness of not having the ability to process a loss or see it coming was even harder to handle. My 9-year-old, she's not 9 now, she's 12, but she's like very expressive. She is a very expressive child, and she was very expressive in her grief, sobbing on the floor, like very physically exhaustive for my grief, that she was very like outward. My son, very much aligned with his personality, was everything was fine. There's not a problem. He wasn't an issue. He was hyperactive, and he normally isn't. And so I was kind of like, what is going on with him? But I think he didn't know what to do with all this energy, all this this sadness in the house.
On the other hand, her eldest daughter, who was about to turn 18, reacted much differently. Instead of slowing down, she threw herself into overdrive mode and stayed busy cooking meals, cleaning, and trying to hold herself together.
I had to really put her back in line and say, you're still a teenager, go out with your friends, you're going to college, this is not your burden, let's process this, you've had a loss too, let's talk about this.
Daniels could see the weight that her daughter was carrying. Her training as a therapist gave her tools to step in, but most parents or guardians don't have that kind of background. For families who feel lost, she recommends starting with the basics. Reach out to local grief support groups. Look into therapists who work with children or teens, and keep your child's school in the loop.
I do feel like giving your kids an opportunity to say, these are all the tools and resources we have for you, and then honoring what resonates with them. And so I was very fortunate to find Billy's Place, which is a grief support group in Phoenix, Arizona, that deals with immediate loss, like a parent or a sibling. And I said to my kids, just try it 3 times. And actually, Billy's Place was like that too. They're like, just give it, we ask that you try 3 times. And I appreciate that, because I would do that in my therapy too. I'd say, hey, and I don't want to come to therapy, but give me, 3 sessions. And if you still feel that way, I'll 100% honor that. And so 2 out of my 3 kids decided that the support groups weren't for them. And my youngest, she was there for over a year.
And grief rarely follows a linear path. For some, the effects bubble up right away. For others, they might not appear until months or even years later. Age, personality, and developmental stage all factor into how this reactive emotion shows up.
With kids, they hit a different developmental stage, or they have now their brain is firing at a different level, and they have a new awareness, or they have a memory that at this stage of life, they can reflect differently on it, or something triggers them and they process that grief all over again. And so sometimes when they're little, they don't process grief until they're, 5 years later, when they can really experience that loss.
For Daniels, her grief wasn't just emotional, but it showed up in her body through chest tightness, sleepless nights, bone-deep exhaustion, and a constant brain fog. Even years later, this ache hasn't disappeared. Experts warn that when grief is left unacknowledged, the costs can be steep. The American Psychiatric Association reports that about 1 in 10 bereaved people develop prolonged grief disorder, a condition linked to higher risk of suicide, substance abuse, and physical illness. For children, those dangers are compounded. Unresolved grief can derail academic performance, development, and change how they view themselves and their future. It's also worth remembering that grief isn't always about death. Kids and teens can also mourn changes to their own life.
A lot of times we want to swoop in and fix it. We want to make it better. And really the biggest gift we can give our kids is validation that it hurts and that there is a time for grieving, grieving a friendship, grieving a new teacher and an old teacher leaving, or grieving the change that sometimes I think it's just our intuition to go in there and cheerlead and be like, but look at this other thing that's happening. It's going to be so great. And it is helpful to sit in the discomfort with your child and say, I'm sorry, I know this is hard and I know it is sad. And how can we honor this? Can we write a letter to the teacher? Or can we write a letter to your friend that left? Or is there an action that we can do that can be somewhat healing?
To learn more about this topic, links to additional resources, and our guest, Natasha Daniels, head to viewpointsradio.org. This story was written by our executive producer, Amira Zaveri. Our studio manager is Jason Dickey. I'm Gary Price.